On BBC1, a fascinating insight into a notorious killer and those who love him.
"20 years ago this month, Peter Sutcliffe was jailed for life for murdering 13 women and attacking 7 more. For most people, he became a symbol of terror and evil, but not for everyone. Few people know that since his conviction, Sutcliffe has conducted intense relationships with dozens of women, who write to the man they know to be the Yorkshire Ripper. Behind the walls of Broadmoor, Sutcliffe has received up to 30 letters a week from female friends and admirers. They've exchanged poems, photographs and gifts. Some have fallen in love with him, even offered to marry him. Others have been driven to contemplate suicide.
Peter Sutcliffe is dangerous because he's very easy to like. He's funny, knows how to be funny, knows how to be kind, knows how to give advice, knows what to say.
By the way, I'm not always as happy as I am when I see you.
It wasn't one girl at a time with Peter. He kept 3. He would tell each one of them, "I wish I had met you first."
I mean, when I talk to you now, I feel cheered. I do.
Can't murder you physically, but he sure as hell can give you one hell of a blow emotionally.
I won't let anyone down who visits me. I'll always give them a really nice visit. I guess I'm a guy who needs friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the part of the evening where we have our guest speaker. You might have heard the term graphologist, as a lot of people are thinking that must be boring. And exactly what does it mean? We've got a lady here who's an expert in the field. Would you give a warm welcome, please, to Diane Simpson?
Hands up those people who underline their signature. Right, people who underline their signatures are emphasising their own importance.
Diane Simpson has spent her working life analysing handwriting. 12 years ago, she developed a fascination with the writing of one of Britain's most reviled serial killers. It was a fascination that seemed to go beyond the professional and became central to her life. Diane is one of dozens of women who've written to Peter Sutcliffe in Broadmoor. At her home in Cheshire, she has built up a huge collection of letters from him.
This is where I keep the Sutcliffe letters and cards, whatever, ranging from 89, coming all the way through the 90s, leading up to the year 2000. There's probably 500, 600 letters here altogether. I keep everything on file. Original letters and copies of letters, a variety of letters from me to him. Fascinating archive into the way this man thinks and the way he operates.
Diane's association with Peter Sutcliffe began nearly 25 years ago at the height of the hunt for the Ripper.
In the late 70s, West Yorkshire Police called me and asked me to do an interpretation on some letters they'd received. These letters turned out to be letters from a man purporting to be the Yorkshire Ripper. And the assessment that I gave was given out nationally in the hope that this writer, if indeed it was the killer, could be identified.
The man police were hunting turned out to be a hoaxer. It was another 18 months before Peter Sutcliffe was caught. By then, Diane was intrigued and wanted to know more about who was the real Yorkshire Ripper. In 1989, she wrote to Sutcliffe in Broadmoor. To her surprise, he replied.
Dear Diane, hi. Well, what can a guy say? If only you knew I'm an ogre, not by a long chalk. Mind you, I'm fully aware of what a horrid, distorted picture the gutter press have tried to paint over the years. They haven't the least idea of the personal tragedy from my point of view and the absolute hell it was for me all those years. My initial reaction was, I don't know about a horrid, distorted picture. There's no denial of the killings. But yes, the press had painted him as the devil incarnate, hardly surprisingly. But it alerted my curiosity. I wondered how he would justify what he'd done. I had mixed feelings when I started to get the letters. On one side, this was the Yorkshire Ripper writing to me. But then, the profession that I have, this was fascinating. To have handwriting by a man who did what he did. He seemed very eager to converse, to communicate. He seemed very grateful for the letters, saying that it was like a breath of fresh air to go in there. My sense of humour he liked. Of course, I now know he says that to everyone, but it was quite potent.
Former Chief Constable Keith Halliwell has spent many hours visiting Sutcliffe in Broadmoor while investigating other crimes he may have committed. He has observed how Sutcliffe has cultivated female friends.
There is a feeling of wishing to reform, a belief that perhaps they can make a difference, or perhaps just understand why they've done this, and why is it, just the why question. Certainly from an individual who receives this attention point of view, they like it. It puts them at the centre of attention, and it gives them the opportunity, certainly I found in Sutcliffe's case, to play games.
Come on, dogs. Poppy, Poppy. Come on, Pop. Come on, my dear. When Peter Sutcliffe first invited me to visit him, I was repelled by the thought. I wrote to him and said, well, I don't think it would serve much purpose because it would be, frankly, little better than a peep show expedition. And he wrote back saying it would not be a peep show expedition. It would be a way of putting a face to the letters. Curiosity took me in. Curiosity thinking, I am going to meet a serial killer. And stupid things came to my mind, like what would I wear? I mean, what do you wear to meet someone that slaughters people? It was a bit like the big bad wolf syndrome. I was going to meet the big bad wolf. And I wore my grey coat because it buttoned up. I don't think I see myself as a femme fatale, but I didn't know what might provoke him. And so I set off and I walked in. And there he was, the beard and the hair. I didn't exactly expect him to be nailed to his chair, but I was surprised when he stood up and walked round and gave me a hug. I thought, shall I hug him back, or will that be provocative? And he said, Diane, there's something I need to tell you. And I said, what, Peter? All agog. And he said, I've only got one. And I thought, is this some sort of crude joke? And then he dropped his stare and grinned and said, one head, most people think I've got two. And he had a point, because this was the big bad wolf. But a big bad wolf that looked like any dog in the street. And it changed. I suddenly saw a man trapped, a man who could have been any man. I had to accept the fact that if I was on a train late at night and some yobs got on, I was a bit nervous and looked around for someone okay to sit by. This was just the sort of man I'd sit by. I wanted him to be like a beast so I could say, I hate you. And looking back into mild brown eyes, how could somebody live with themselves and be so ordinary, having the knowledge that he had?
Diane's fascination had been sparked by her professional interest. For some women, there are different attractions.
It may be the man's charisma and his focusing on her, which is very seductive to her and makes her feel important.
Sheila Eisenberg is a writer in the United States and one of the few people who has studied women who've become involved with notorious killers. She's interviewed dozens of such women, researching their backgrounds and motives.
There's the allure of the bad boy. There's the attraction that some women have toward the most macho, the most machismo, the most male men. All of these relationships are relationships that I theorize are based on delusion. They're based on the delusion of what the woman
Sandra Lester is a former therapist turned artist who wanted to believe she'd found lasting love with Peter Sutcliffe. Her hopes were to be brutally crushed. She's now rebuilding her life with her new husband.
Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe that it actually all happened. 7 or 8 years ago I was writing to Peter Sutcliffe at Broadmoor, and my life just changed completely. And it was a very, very gruelling experience. I started out sharing my freedom with him, and I became so embroiled in his incarceration that I felt imprisoned myself. I'm a lonely heart with no place to hide, a sinking ship on a tempestuous tide, hoping for help and someone to save the spirit from dying. Can one take any more? Simply ask, seek, knock on the proverbial new door. And I think you can tell from that poem that I was going through a particularly difficult time in my life. I was trying to come to terms with a lot of very horrific, abusive situations that I'd experienced as a child. And I felt particularly lonely in all of that. I really needed to take some time out and think about these things. And during the course of that time, I read an article about Peter Sutcliffe. And he looked particularly isolated. And I do have a great compassion for people that suffer with mental disorders. I felt in a humanitarian sense, I could offer him like a Christian hand of support, if you like. And that's how the writing came about. Within a week we were writing to one another every day, and it wasn't just 1 or 2 pages, it was a number of pages, anything up to 20, 25 pages. Dear Sandy, hi. Well, yet more brilliant, happy sunshine came pouring into me from your big brown envelope again today. It's great to have this Cloud 9 thing with you. Because you two are so refined and sensitive a person. You have patience and understanding, a sense of good humour, you're such a cutie, and a good head on your shoulders. We're on the same wavelength, there's no doubt about that either. Well, I'm not sure about that now. Maybe he thought I was on the same wavelength, but the letters seemed to be very important to him. He was really expressing a lot of happiness, a lot of positivity. He was telling me all the time how every morning he was looking forward to getting my letters. I used to illustrate them, you see. How do you put so much bounce into your letters? It makes me bounce along too. Do you remember that 60s record? Rubber ball, keep bouncing back to... It's like that, because you make me bounce all over the place. Bouncing with happiness, that's what it is.
There's often just a kind of almost a pure relationship where the man and the woman relate on a level of writing poetry or sending mementos, and there's really no sex, there's no nitty-gritty. It's actually letting a woman live out a romantic novel or a romance novel or a soap opera. She is every day living out this kind of passionate, fantastic existence that has no basis in reality, really. Because if the man were not in prison, they would have no relationship.
Several hundred miles away on Tyneside, a middle-aged woman was also heavily involved with Sutcliffe.
This is the bedroom where I keep all the letters.
Olive Curry exchanged letters with Sutcliffe for more than 10 years.
This is an old suitcase belonging to my mother-in-law when she was young, I think. Oh, boy. Right, there they are. From all the years, kept in... I hate touching the thing, but never mind. All the letters there. There's Christmas cards. That's an old one. Letter included. Best regards from Pete. All the letters have a blue slip in because they must go through the censor. He gets a lot out without the censor, but never mind, that's what we have to have. And the censor's name on it. This came by post. This is my husband and I. We had been to a wedding and we sent photographs, so we painted it from the photograph. But of course, not framed and not on the wall. But there it is. It's a better one of me, I think, than my husband. But, yeah. PWS, that's Peter William Sutcliffe.
How do you feel about that picture?
I feel that.
Olive had formed an intense relationship with Sutcliffe, which came to dominate her life. It began more than 20 years earlier when she became convinced that Sutcliffe had come to her workplace with the notorious hoaxer.
I worked in this canteen in 1978, and that summer 2 men would come in regularly. One, tallish, black-haired, quite nice looking. The other one, a little fat man. And they would sit here, always, together. The dark man, very, very nice, polite, quiet, nicely spoken, told me about his house in Bradford, a lorry driver, his wife was a teacher, even told me how much his house cost.
When Sutcliffe was arrested and his photo appeared in the paper, Olive was certain it was the same man who had visited her canteen.
I couldn't believe he could be the Yorkshire Ripper. When I read in the paper all the details, what she had told me, and I saw the photograph, it had to be him. Then I remembered his companion with a lisp. He had a Sunderland accent. I felt sure he was the hoaxer who sent the letters and put the police on another trail.
I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. It can't be much good, can you? You are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
Olive was convinced that the Sunderland man responsible for the hoax letters and tape was Sutcliffe's accomplice, and they drank tea together in her canteen that summer. She went to the police with her claims.
The accomplice theory has some credibility because of the nature of some of the crimes. Peter Sutcliffe has always been adamant that he was alone. My own view is that there were, in certain cases, other people involved. One of the leads, particularly the Geordie accent and the north-east nature of many of the issues, relate to sightings and belief that he was seen in a cafe, and Olive raised this, and I spoke with her about it. And we actually pursued that without any success.
But Olive was not put off. 3 years after Sutcliffe's conviction, she decided to contact him in Broadmoor. At first, she kept quiet about her real motives.
I'd read in the pay for his birthday, so I sent a birthday card, and he wrote back and said thank you. From then on, we kept on writing. I think I spend most of my cash on stamps, because I don't smoke and haven't had a drink for over 5 years. Writing's just about my only pleasure, as there's nothing else to keep my mind occupied. That I can quite believe, because in the hospital, letters and visits are the lifeline to those people. It's all they have got.
Olive then asked Sutcliffe about the time she believed he'd visited her canteen with his companion from Sunderland. His reply was not what she wanted to hear.
I wish you'd believe me that I never knew anyone of that description. You have quite obviously gotten me mixed up with someone else, but it simply wasn't so. I'll gladly tell you if I knew anything about him, if only for your own peace of mind. But he's a big liar. Of course he was there. Of course he knows the man. He was there, and that man was with him, and that man is still out there.
Obsession is a huge part of it, because in order to have a relationship with a convicted murderer or a convicted serial killer, you must be obsessed. You must be devoted. I call it devotion. I guess obsession is the furthest extreme, but devotion to the point where you are willing to give up everything for this person and or this relationship.
Peter hinted so many times he would tell me the truth if I kept on writing. I told him if he told me the truth, I would write as long as I could pick a pen up.
Sutcliffe was gathering a whole string of female friends and admirers who were getting emotionally entangled with him, to devastating effect. Sutcliffe began to take his game playing one step further. He started telling his various women friends about one another, putting them in touch and encouraging rivalry. He suggested to Diane that she might like to meet his old friend, Olive Curry. The two women struck up a friendship.
Over the years, how many girls do you reckon there have been?
So I've talked particularly to 9 that I can think of, or been in touch with me. Because he wanted to find out about them.
He gave me your phone number. Do you think he wanted me to find out about you, or you about me?
Yes, that was the other way, yes. Maybe it's part of the illness, I don't know. But they could develop this charm to cover up all the bad things. But of course he said the same thing to every one of them, if I had met you first.
A lot of women wrote to him, and he would boast about the ones who wrote to him. He would even show me photographs of some of them and suggest that he'd had offers of marriage. Now, whether this was true or not, I don't know. But he was clearly flattered by it and clearly enjoyed the attention.
He had all these girls, and what he wanted to know was tittle-tattle about the other girls. He put them in touch with me so that they would tell me things about each other, so I would tell him. The first girl that I knew about was a little girl from Scotland, a nice girl, very respectable girl. He led her on. She got very fond of him. Then he dropped her and said he's going back to his wife. And she cried on the phone to me and said this, he's going back to his wife. Well, how on earth could he go back to his wife? In Broadmoor, but anyway. And there's the 2 girls from Birmingham who would visit, sometimes together, sometimes separate, and he used them. One got so annoyed, she tracked one of the girls down and said, "You leave him alone." Really besotted with them, these girls. And he knew it.
He signed off on this particular letter saying, "OK, now I'll have to be saying bye-bye for now. Sweet dreams, lots of happiness for you, and the biggest, most bestest ever, cloud 9, utopian, giant-sized, deliciously captivating, mind-blowingly scrumptious hug that you could possibly imagine. With all my love and fondest thoughts, always and always. It comes across as quite a nice, normal chap. And at the time, these are all things I needed to hear, you must bear in mind. I was extremely lonely and desperately needed support and love and kindness. I couldn't have reached out to a man in general because I had nothing to offer him in terms of a physical or sexual relationship.
In the research that I did, the bottom line that I found with most women who get into relationships with murderers is that they have had an abuse in their past, you know, some kind of abuse. And in some cases, a woman might have been abused in her childhood and also had a first husband or a first boyfriend who abused her.
I had been severely abused in my early childhood and throughout my childhood, and my virginity was taken in rape. It was somebody outside of the family, and I had repressed all of that, and it often is the only safety mechanism for you, and sometimes all of that then rises to consciousness and the trauma is there confronting you in your 30s. And this is the period when I started writing to Peter.
Diane continued to exchange letters with Sutcliffe, and their relationship gathered momentum. He seemed to want it to grow closer.
I can tell you're a caring person. And what's more, I like you. It's the way you speak in your letters. You're cautious, but warm and kind-hearted. He goes on to tell me, he says, I have a lot of long-term friends, you know, and I'm not shy by any means. I do know how to treat a lady and make her relax and enjoy herself. The mind boggled. One of Peter's hobbies is painting. He copies pictures from postcards or other pictures. This is one he copied from a postcard of Bournemouth Beach. And he inserted a figure that he said was me in it with one of my dogs. Peter is allowed to send message tapes to people. Here's one, pretty typical one that he sent to me. My husband and I listened to it at the breakfast table.
Diane, thanks for all the happiness you've brought me. You've brought me zillions and zillions of happy moments. You've filled my heart with gladness, and all the good wishes you've sent me and the way you've helped me. And I'm just lost for words. There's nothing adequate enough to describe the way I feel about you as a friend. You mean the world to me, all right? Enough of that, because I tend to get carried away and all sloppy. No, I don't think you'd like that.
Very typical Peter. Spinning a yarn, bit of flattery.
At his trial, Sutcliffe had pleaded diminished responsibility for his murderous attacks. He claimed he was on a mission specially chosen by God. Sutcliffe said he first heard voices in his head while working as a gravedigger in Bingley Cemetery after leaving school. Although he later admitted that no woman was safe, he claimed that the voices told him that his mission was to clean the streets of prostitutes. Sutcliffe was not believed by the jury, and he was convicted of murder. 4 years later, he was transferred to Broadmoor to be treated for paranoid schizophrenia.
There was never an instant where he showed that he was able to understand, to comprehend the enormity of what he'd done. If I thought that he knew precisely what he was doing, that he could help it, that he had a choice in the matter, I would not have visited him.
I call that denial, basically. Denying that he's responsible for the act, and there may be so many extenuating circumstances in the woman's mind. For example, he may have been drinking. He may have been on drugs. He may have been very young. He may have not known what he was doing. His friends may have made him do it. He may have had psychological problems or mental disorders. It allows the woman to enter into an intimate relationship with a murderer because he's not really a murderer. He's not really a bad person.
On Tyneside, Olive Curry was also getting sucked into a deeper involvement with Sutcliffe. He told her he enjoyed the contact, and she continued to write. Then Olive made arrangements to visit him in Broadmoor.
People have asked before, was I not frightened? But I wasn't frightened of the young man in the canteen. He couldn't frighten anybody. So I couldn't say I was frightened because I wasn't then. And of course I had my husband with me, and I was determined, to keep things calm. In fact, try to put to one side, you can't forget what he did, but to keep it to one side and just see the young man who had been in the canteen. And that's the way we worked it. I was more in the league of an aunt. In fact, he told Ronnie Cray I was his aunt. Because family in Broadmoor are never questioned about anything. Strangers are. And that's why he said I was his aunt. The first visit we made was for 2 hours, and Broadmoor is a very traumatic place to visit any time. But we waited in Central Hall, and I saw him coming along the corridor, and I said to my husband, there he is there. He saw me, he looked around, and then he looked again, then he came over. He saw me, of course he did. And I said, you do remember? No, I don't remember. That's all he ever said to me, I can't remember. I said, you did come to the canteen with that man from Sunderland? I can't remember. That's all he ever said. But it was him.
Why do you think he wanted you to visit?
I really think it was because he missed his mother. She was the only one he ever cared about in what I would call a normal relationship. He did love his mother. And I think somehow an older couple as we were appealed to him.
I sent Peter some gifts. I personalised a lot of things for him with my embroidery work. I sent a pillowcase, some little cloths and things just to make his room better, because he was giving me an awful lot. The only help I get here is when I help myself. I'm not including you in that, of course, because you are a tremendous help. With all the happiness and sunshine that you put my way, bless your dear and delightful heart. You're as gentle as the breeze and as precious as the stars. We need time in one of those cornfields to laugh and to chat and to relax and reflect upon, you bet, practically everything.
A man who's behind bars has lots of time on his hands. And with that time, he can write beautiful love letters. He can write poetry. He can write 20-page letters. He can write 40-page letters. He can write 100-page letters. He can write every day. He can call. He can collect calls as often as she'll receive the call. He can make her feel like she is the most special and the most important person in the whole world to him.
Diane was writing several times a month to Sutcliffe. She claims that he'd come up with a ploy to keep her interest going.
He kept holding out hooks to me. There are other crimes, Di. There were other things, maybe. I was told by the hospital the relationship seemed to have a particular significance. I knew that there were other crimes, other attacks, that everyone thought must have been him, but he would not admit it. I didn't know if he was playing games, if he would admit. But I thought, I'll give it a go.
Diane kept up her contact. Then on one visit, quite unexpectedly, the tone of their contact changed.
When it was time to go, instead of the customary hug, he suddenly gave me a kiss, which was unexpected, and I wasn't quite sure how to react. The two things had come together. There were other crimes, and he felt affection, or he said he felt affection. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this, and it was uncomfortable. The whole situation had become uncomfortable. I wrote to Peter to explain that perhaps I shouldn't come anymore, and he wrote back and saying, yes, you should, don't worry. I could sense your reserve. Don't worry, it'll be all right.
Sandra was preparing to change her life for Sutcliffe. His letters had become indispensable to her.
After a couple of months of writing, on an everyday basis, I felt that I was regaining so much confidence that I decided to set up a part-time therapy practice in Reading with a view to visiting Peter Sutcliffe on a regular basis. This particular letter says, I hope it goes smoothly and that you can find another place that is suitable for living accommodation. I can imagine how it feels, making ends meet and starting up new clients. But keep at it, Sandy, because you're doing an excellent job and you're helping a lot of people who are suffering with their own various problems. I felt that he appreciated my worth. I genuinely believed that he did. Part of me even now still believes that he did.
Diane began to carefully study each of her letters from Sutcliffe for clues to his state of mind. She began to notice something distinctive.
Back in 1992, one particular feature began to show itself, and I hadn't seen it for years. Not with this sort of regularity. It's called overwriting, where the writer goes over and over on the same line, just occasionally. There's an almost uncontrollable intensity, where without thinking about it, he's running over the same spot. He's not able to control the pen properly. It doesn't go through the paper, it judders. Here's another example of double T crossing. Here again, two movements where one normally occurs. This was interesting because this particular feature appeared on his worksheets, his driver's logs when he was working as a lorry driver. 3 days before an attack, the writing would be slightly overwritten, less legible. 2 days before, it increased. It was virtually every word. The day before was all overwritten. It was extremely difficult to read. Then came an attack. The writing reverted back to as it had been in the first place. Now, it wasn't appearing to that degree in these letters, but it was increasing, indicating here we have a rising level of anxiety. Something was happening, and I felt to capitalise on it, this is the time to start pressurising him, bringing in the fact that he could now confess to some of the attacks that he'd been hinting to me that he had committed. I contacted Chief Constable Keith Halliwell and suggested that he might like to interview Peter Sutcliffe.
I would use and did use anything I could professionally with my relationship with him, and using any other opportunity I had to get to the truth. Diane Simpson, certainly she was helping me, particularly feeding back to me his mood, his state of mind, through her relationship.
Halliwell went to see Sutcliffe in Broadmoor in October of '92. Sutcliffe confessed to 2 other attempted murders.
I thought, right, there were many more possibles. Let's see how far we can go.
Week after week, Diane continued to write to Sutcliffe. Once a month she went to see him in Broadmoor. She says her motive was simply to seek further confessions.
I didn't think that he would confess specifically to me. I pondered upon whether or not he had reached a time of his life that he wished to speak, to clear the decks, as it were. At this stage of the game, I didn't realise that not for sure that it was a ploy to keep my interest going, which I believe it was. We've exchanged Christmas cards, Valentine's Day cards. Well, this is ostensibly it was arrived on the 14th of February. It's actually a quote from the Bible and saying, just to make me smile on Valentine's Day. Who on earth could this be from? If you think it's me, you could be wrong. Tee-hee. He sent them by the dozen. This was one of many. It's the way he did things. I think in sending the letters and the gifts and commenting about affection he was testing the water. I don't think any of the love that was professed by inference was meant at all. Could I have fallen for Peter Sutcliffe, fallen in love with him? Someone who habitually went with prostitutes, someone who was into violent crime, someone who had convictions for theft, someone who lied all the time. No, thank you. I can categorically say that's not my type.
As the relationship developed, we became closer and closer, and in one of his letters he said, "I'll be there with you in spirit anyway, Sandy. So if you feel a really caring cuddle in the middle of the night, it will be me. So don't worry. Okay." And then there's like this little face that he does, and a red tongue, and it's dribbling. Peter did mention marriage. In fact, he said in his own words that we were getting on so well, who knows, in the future we might decide to tie the knot. Yes, I did consider it, because I thought maybe that's what I was meant to do. I was thinking of becoming a nun, but maybe I'm being blessed with a husband and he is going to be taking my therapeutic talents and he will be supportive to me. At the time, I can't be more honest. And that is what went through my mind.
After years of exchanging letters, Olive was getting increasingly frustrated that Sutcliffe continued to deny having met her. He still encouraged her to keep up with her friendly visits, even sending cards to her husband, Arthur.
Wishing and praying for your good health and happiness, always.
Olive felt she was being manipulated by Sutcliffe.
I couldn't stand any kind of affection from him, because it was all lies. All lies.
Was he affectionate too?
In his way. He was affectionate because, you see, in Central Hall, everybody looked at him. So it flattered him to show affection. He tried it with everybody. He didn't care about Arthur. He didn't care about him. He can't care about anybody. These are all hooks to keep you going back.
Sutcliffe could draw people into him, could have people trust him with an ulterior motive, and that was clearly part of his criminality and part of his the way he operated as a criminal. One shouldn't expect that they suddenly change their character or their philosophy or their psyche, as it were, when they're caught and they're in prison.
In 1991, Arthur died, but Olive was determined to keep going with her mission, and her obsession with Sutcliffe continued. Her children and grandchildren have grown up hearing tales of Peter Sutcliffe.
Mum wants me to prove right, She'll fight till the day she dies to be proved right. She's got it in between her teeth, she'll not let it drop. She'll go on and on. And she's still going on about it. I've had it for like 22, 23 years now.
The truth will out one of these days.
Oh, one day it'll come out. It was pity he didn't open his mouth earlier, it it'd come out earlier. You know, he knows what's happened.
But from what I've read of these people, they always keep something back.
After many months of intimate letters, Sandra was about to fall victim to Sutcliffe's game playing. She had not yet met him. He suggested that she come for an interview at the hospital to become one of his visitors.
He was expressing very profoundly that he wanted us to meet. And not just meet, it was like the next indispensable step towards a future. And he says in this letter, I hope you get through the interview okay, because I'm counting on you, my sweet. I do love you dearly.
As Sandra arrived at Broadmoor, something unexpected was about to happen.
I can remember going into the environment and thinking, there's something not quite right here. It was as if a decision had been made prior to my presenting myself there in person. The forensic psychiatrist had been reading the letters and she'd seen that I was supporting him and helping him and giving him tapes and so on and so forth, and I felt that she'd just made a decision that she was going to reject me. And the one thing that she did that I wasn't ready for was to say to me, how do you feel about him writing to other women? You don't like it, do you? And I said, no, I don't. And after I'd answered that question, the interview was closed. At that point, I thought, I must just be a number. And I think he did refer to me as number one on a couple of occasions. You're my number one. Well, it wasn't until it got to that stage that I realised that there was loads more than just number one. I received a letter from Broadmoor Hospital. The decision to withhold visiting in this case was made by the clinical team in consultation with the patient, who does not wish to have an exclusive relationship with a female correspondent or visitor. He wishes to continue to have a number of female friends.
If Peter responded to letters from women antagonistically, rudely, crudely, cruelly, they wouldn't write back, because he doesn't. Bait's a trap. They think they've discovered somebody quite different. It's not until they get as close as can be, and then, when they're vulnerable, is when they'll take away the emotional lifeline.
I felt like I'd been brutally, destructively indoctrinated with so much pain and confusion emotionally. This was just before Christmas. I had no one to confide in about it, so I landed up feeling suicidal myself. The system is blessing him with all the resources available to do exactly what he was doing on the out. Manipulating women.
I don't know how manipulative he was, but certainly he was playing games, and he would say to me that it was a game, and almost in some ways like a child, sort of perhaps as if they're getting one over on someone else. But this is part of the psyche of individuals like this anyway.
The confusion was absolute torment. And I spent Christmas on my own crying. And at that point I thought, you have got to reconcile the way this has all made you feel.
Sandra decided to express her feelings in a very public way on national television.
suppose a lot of people would say women like you who would write to people like him deserve everything you get, and it's your problem, not the system's problem.
Well, no, I don't see that at all, because there's obviously a flaw in the system. If somebody is that dangerous that they can manipulate you and coerce you into believing...
But he was that dangerous that he killed people and he's now locked away.
Right. In that case, don't you agree with me then that the resources that are available to him are far too good?
An individual chooses to do something, and the system doesn't encourage that, and I suppose in the first instance doesn't discourage it. And once it intervenes to make a judgment, and this happens often in officialdom, then people either feel thwarted that they have been stopped doing something that they've been able to do in the past, or if they get hurt, they feel, well, why didn't they stop me earlier? And it is very difficult for an establishment to make that judgment.
I stopped writing for a little while, and then I just popped a card in the post saying I think it would be best for me to stop writing altogether. And he responded by saying, "Dear Sandy, hi, thanks for your 2 cards. I'm glad to have heard from you. It seemed as though I wouldn't when you said we'd be best not writing for a while. I'd say that would be too negative altogether, don't you?" And then he's done a little face with tears coming out. I'm in a vulnerable position in here, you know, Sandy. I need 1 or 2 friends. Crikey, I've got enough enemies. So I have to try to level the balance a wee bit. Don't you see that?
Last year, Diane finally realised that she too was being used by Sutcliffe. There had been no more confessions, despite another 8 years in close contact with him. Instead, their relationship took a new turn. She began to receive emails from one of his latest girlfriends.
When she first wrote to me, she had no idea there were other girlfriends.
Diane broke the news to her that she was one of many. She was distraught.
I feel shattered and broken because he's built me up for such a fall. He made me a better person. Overnight I find I've changed again, worse than ever. I can't sleep, I can't eat. Why did he do this? A bit later on in the correspondence, it got even more scary. In one of her emails, she said, "I've entered a deep state of depression and I've spent a suicidal weekend. I still love him a great deal, and I just wish it wasn't true. My husband and I were going to try again. I turned it down because I thought I'd found something better."
Diane felt that she unwittingly had been manipulated by Sutcliffe to finish his contact with this woman. She was furious.
I had the feeling that Peter was using me to end it. Using me as the hammer. May sound melodramatic, but that is what happened. And I won't be the hammer.
After a 12-year relationship with Sutcliffe and more than 400 hours of visits, Diane felt it could no longer continue. Although she says she never fell for him, she realised that all along it had just been another game.
It was, from my part, a friendship built on truth. Peter's part of friendship built on lies. I feel that I was being manipulated, a pawn in a game, but I have free will. I have a choice. My choice was not to play the game anymore.
In 1998, I suppose I'd reconciled a lot because by then I was married, and I did write to him. I wrote to him to let him know that I was married. I guess I'd grown, I'd moved forward. I didn't feel confused. I saw it exactly for what it really is. He also wrote, "What can I really offer you anyway? It's a strange situation being locked away.
honestly, I'm quite amiable, quite calm and quite rational and intelligent, and I'm a very peaceful person, you know. You've got to meet me really and have a conversation.